Hello and welcome to the first Everybody Hates Your Brand of 2026. This podcast continues to operate without a defined schedule, but this is the start of a run of episodes over the coming months. Today we talk to Ian Reeves. Ian is the Managing Director of Flourish CRM, an independent specialist CRM agency with offices in both Bristol in the UK and Dubai, where they create award-winning campaigns for clients like Nissan and Samsung. We talk about how an agency like his is, if you'll pardon the pun, flourishing in the febrile world of huge holding companies like Omnicom and WPP and a martech sector that is undergoing extraordinary change. Ian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's lovely to have you here. Regular listeners to this podcast will know we start the same way with every podcast we do, which is what I call the credibility section. It's just a space for you to explain yourself, who you are, your experience, your current role. So give people some context about your opinions and how they should take those opinions. So would you mind giving us a bit of a sort of retrospective of your career and where you are now?
No, not at all. I started life as an account manager in agencies with a specialism in website development. I was building or helping to build, managing large-scale websites for government agencies in the UK. Probably the largest was for the Department for Education. And when I got bored of that, I moved over to a brand job for McCann Erickson in the Midlands, Birmingham in the UK, where I worked on brands like Mercedes, Maybach, SLR, that Mercedes family. And I'm really proud of launching Mercedes-Benz World here in the UK. And that's where I found a passion for print. And I think that's kind of added to where I am now. And so following some stints at some specialist agencies, including a web gaming agency when Flash was still around, and a bit of time in Australia looking after special projects for Combank, I moved back to the UK, and that kind of offline and online experience kind of culminated in finding a role at Flourish. At the time, Flourish was a digital and direct marketing agency. Today, I'm the MD of Flourish. We're a specialist CRM agency. We're platform and channel agnostic. We have offices in Bristol, Dubai, and a small office in London. We send over 1 billion emails a year for some fantastic clients, including 3 of the top 5 largest brands in the world. So I'm really proud of what we've achieved. I feel like I found my home somewhere that combines that kind of brand experience with that kind of human-computer interaction. And ultimately, our job is to encourage people to take action.
That's great. So great experience. I think when we were talking about you coming on the podcast, I think I had sort of 2 chunks of topics, if you like, in my head. And the first one of those was around being an agency and being an independent agency and a specialist. And I think the story of 2025 and already in 2026 is one of consolidation in the agency world. I think you just have to look at what's happening with Omnicom and IPG in the US. You have to look at the wonderful situation WPP have found themselves in, close to home. Armadillo, your Bristol competitors bought by a Canadian company, Bond. It seems like being a specialist independent agency in that world creates some real opportunities, but also has some cons and some challenges. And I wondered if you could kind of articulate some of those pros and cons, please.
Yeah, it's a mad world out there, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think change is good. I think it needs it. I would say for us, we see it as an opportunity. There's more pros than cons in that from our side. We find ourselves competing with some of those big consultancies. We're lucky enough to have big enough brands to find ourselves at the table and to be invited to the table to pitch against big consultancies, to pitch against some of those big agencies. And we have a really good win rate against them. As a specialist agency and any specialist agency around the world, no matter what discipline, they'll always have something that those bigger agencies can't offer. Our senior team work really closely with those clients. They work really closely with the work. That passion comes through, that knowledge comes through, and we find our clients really respect that. I think at the same time, scale is obviously a challenge, but But I see that slightly differently, and I talk to many a business where they're working with a large scale business, some that you've already mentioned, and maybe they've got 300 people dedicated to CRM or building emails. And I think we take a different view on that. We talk to them around how we can save costs. That team doesn't need to be that many people. That actually machines can solve some of that now, and that leads nicely into the AI conversation that everybody's happening now. But I think ultimately we're not a challenger to some of those big businesses as well. We naturally sit underneath the brand agency, especially with the discipline of CRM and all of the channels that can potentially sit under CRM. They're not going to sit in a brand book. They're not going to be designed. And actually we operate in a space where brand and data collide. And quite often we find ourselves sitting nicely under that brand agency, helping to give them insight for what the bedrock of data is saying and how we can tweak that brand into something that will resonate with their audience. Through CRM, there are smaller pools. We're not looking at this brand identity works for everybody. We're looking at how we can tweak that brand, what messaging we can give. And I think that puts us in a really lovely spot. What that has meant for us is that we've seen decent growth. We've seen decent growth over the last 5 years. And long may that continue. We are consistently being invited into more pitches where those bigger agencies are present, but as you say, some of those specialists are leaving, and that for us, we're able to pick up great talent.
Yeah, I think that's your point about specialism, I think, and, worked for big brand agencies like DDB, whereas, in CRM and have, again, worked for independent agencies. And I think unlocking the specificity of those channels is something that big brand agencies aren't particularly great at. It's just like, here's the TV ad or here's whatever it is, and we'll just take that image and we'll whack it in an email. No, and that's one thing that strikes me about CRM at the moment is the multitude of channels that are available and the differing strengths and weaknesses among those channels. And I'm keen to kind of talk a little bit about that as we get further into this podcast. One of the things that is also interesting is where you're currently based down in the lovely town of Bristol. Big fan of Bristol. Lovely place in the southwest of England. And you talked about attracting talent. From your perspective, what impact does being in Bristol give you? Does it make recruitment harder, or do you see it as a positive? What are the pros and cons of that location?
I'm really proud of being a regional agency. In the UK, where there is that central kind of London hub, probably Manchester and Birmingham next, Bristol's somewhere in that pecking order, but there's not breadth and depth of talent. You're right. There is some really good talent here, and we don't compete for business. We definitely compete for people. And I think building an agency, we really need to build an agency with the right culture, with the right values. The vision, the mission is so important. But building an agency where everyone understands where we're heading and where we're going, it is so important. So keeping hold of people, that's key. We're lucky enough, our exec creative director and one of our art directors, they've worked with us for 20 years. So I think that's, in an agency world, that's a rarity. But I think it also shows that we're doing the right thing and focusing on that and adding something a little bit different. We operate a program of Flourish together. It's a program of additional non-contractual benefits, but we all contribute to that, and it's about trying to create the right culture, but equally giving something back. That's the keeping hold of people, but you're right that as we grow, we need to look wider for that talent density. We're lucky we have an office in Dubai, and we can look overseas for that. And Dubai has equally a really good depth of talent. Someone mentioned something to me a few years ago about not being able to have a monopoly on good people. And that being that we're 70 people globally, we can't employ everybody we want to employ. And that means investing in training. It means allowing people to look to spend time in what they're interested in. We don't have any ceilings at Flourish, and people grow into roles that probably didn't exist maybe 2 or 3 years ago. We have a head of CRO. We look at that as a CRO in CRM. It's not an offering that I see in many CRM agencies. So thinking about things differently, looking at what probably more traditional agencies have, but also web agencies and non-traditional roles has really helped us to attract really good talent. But as you say, it's a challenge, but one that I think we've done really well with. obviously, the previous question around some of those big agencies losing top talent, it's a great thing for independents, and there's great talent around.
Yeah, and I imagine that extends also to the context of like working practices. A lot of RTO mandates, a lot of this and that kind of thing. And I think as an independent agency, maybe a bit more nimble, a bit more live, and in terms of how you're making those decisions. I think that nimbleness has got to be a real benefit.
It has. It has. And I've worked for big agencies in the past, and I've seen how many models they roll out, uh, and how I think agencies sometimes try to make clients work in their way. We tried to keep things simple. We are proudly pragmatic. We have one agency model. It's optimize, elevate, transform. It translates really well into client language. And optimize is about small tweaks without costing a lot of money. What can we do to show your boss that the investment in a CRM agency makes sense? Elevate is how do we take to that next stage? Where do we go? And transform is that 5 year plan, that North Star, that the thing we hope you never get to, the thing that keeps moving as we optimize and elevate. But to do that, we have to be agile. We have to change, and we have to react really, really quickly. I think there's a lot of competition out there, and and if we're not reacting quickly, then we're letting our clients down. So we'll talk about it in a minute, I'm sure, but we have a culture of curiosity at Flourish, and I'm really proud of that. And I think asking questions, constantly trying to get under the skin of a client and figure out what's new means that we're not only reacting, but it allows us to go to clients with ideas, and I think that nimbleness and proactiveness of doing that really makes a difference in an independent agency.
And speaking of somebody who started or had the first half plus of his career client side, an agency that understands your business is worth its weight in gold, because I think sometimes there's a little bit with some agencies, an element of institutional arrogance, like we know best, you hired us. But it's like, yeah, but you need to understand our business, what we can and cannot do. So, and I think what you're saying is exactly that. It's okay, you can't do that, fine. Maybe we put that on the 5 year one, but here's what we can do right now. And I think that's hugely important. You mentioned Dubai, and I think that's a really interesting thing. I think you've great success in 2025's DMA Awards with a gold and 2 bronze Nissan Patrol, if I remember rightly, across the Middle East. How did the Dubai thing come about?
Yeah, so we've been in Dubai for 10 years, and we grew with clients. So we used to have Samsung in the UK, Australia, and Dubai. And so out of we had Samsung in the UK for 12 years, and out of the success of Samsung in the UK, we opened an office in Australia and then in Dubai. So we are lucky enough to open with clients, and that really helps. It makes things a hell of a lot easier. With Dubai, we were lucky enough to be able to move some of our team over. And that meant that they really understood our ethos, the way that we operated. It meant that we were opening an office with the same culture effectively, despite it being in a different country. We lost Samsung. They moved to a global agency model. And then we won them back last year in Dubai. So we're delighted that Samsung came back. However, we've grown the agency in Dubai. There's 16 people in the office in Dubai now, and we've seen some massive change in Dubai over that time. I think Dubai, when we first started, CRM was seen as a technology, not a discipline, and I think that's really changed. I think I think it's matured in terms of the view of CRM, but and that's allowed us to continue to operate, to continue to grow. Uh, the time zone helps. It's not too different. There's a massive expat community, but equally there is a really diverse cultural team in our office. I think there's probably 10 different languages spoken in our office. So yeah, Dubai's done fantastically well. Last year saw fantastic growth, and long may that continue. We're seeing the Alliance of Independent Agencies opening an offering in Dubai, and there are increasingly independent agencies popping up that weren't there before.
That's great to hear. Fascinating stuff. Okay, I feel like we've covered a little bit about the world of agencies and where that's going, and I'm kind of keen to talk to you. We talk about your approach and all that kind of stuff, and Flourish's approach. Talk about a bit about the work. There's a question I like to ask, and this is episode 63 or 64 of this podcast, and there's kind of questions that I like to ask that have almost acts as longitudinal data over 60. I'm sure one day I'll look back at some of the transcripts and see if I can pull out any, grand themes or any of that kind of stuff. And I've asked this with a few agency leaders, which is, what are the kind of challenges that you are being asked to take on by clients? So and specifically, what is coming up regularly? Because if you look at, like, historically with CRM, it's usually something like, "I've got this bit of martech, I don't know what to do with it," or, we don't think, like, we're exploiting the best of what we can do. I'm really interested to know, what are the challenges that your clients are coming to you with, and are there commonalities, or is it more random, I suppose?
Yeah, I think I'll answer that in a couple of ways. People tend to come to us with one of three challenges. It is, I've got a CRM platform and I don't know how to use it. I've got a CRM platform and I think I need a new one, or I've got a particular challenge, and that particular challenge normally tends to be something around sales. CRM as a channel isn't delivering the sales it needs to, or a particular challenge like my win back campaign isn't working anymore. And I'd say that's probably how most people tend to come to us. There's a challenge in that quite often what they're coming to us with is not really their problem, and maybe that is because they're using email and over direct mail, for example. And I remember a big campaign with eBay a few years ago where they were sending emails and their high net worth customers had stopped spending. We sent DM instead and got a 40% better return on investment through DM than we did through email. All of those things we've spoken about allows us to challenge that. What I do find is that we are increasingly working with businesses to change their view from a CRM point of view and what good is. And I think when we're talking about sales from CRM not providing the results that they're expecting, maybe they're measuring the wrong thing. Maybe they're measuring vanity metrics like email opens and clicks rather than contribution of CRM as a whole. I'd love to see, and I've never seen it, and I ask for this quite a lot. What impact has CRM had on return on ad spend? And I'd love to see that being reported at board level rather than the questions of, and what has email done? And I think quite often we fall into a trap that email is marked like paid media, or it's just seen as another channel. And I'd say, to answer your question, the thing that people come to us mostly with is underperformance or underperformance against expected business targets. I don't think that's always the case. We spend a lot of time trying to educate a business into what success looks like and the contribution of CRM. Um, we worked with a client probably not so long ago. I won't tell you who they are, but all of the individual agencies who worked on the accounts were targeted individually, and it meant that nobody shared any data. So and we weren't encouraged to share data with the media team because we were marked on how well our individual channels were performing. It's naive, and I think it takes a mature management team to understand that every channel has to work together, and ultimately it is that overarching contribution that they all play.
It's happening more and more now, but even at a simple level, people understanding what's a control group is, what's a fallow group is, why you should have them, when you should take that stuff is, it still surprises me that those conversations still happen at client level. And I think that's a really interesting challenge. Two of the three things you said, two of those were martech related. And I think you're right, part of it is culturally, we're maybe looking at the problem from the wrong perspective. But it is no doubt that the world of martech is the thing that continues to change, has changed extraordinarily over the last, it has accelerated, I guess, over the last 2 or 3 years since generative AI became a thing. And even as predictive AI becomes better and better and better. There was a stat, I was reading a state of martech report, and they're saying that over 3/4 of new products added in the last 12 months were quote unquote AI native now. What that means, whether someone's just slapped the word AI onto a bit of kit is another question. But AI is the big transformative thing. You mentioned it earlier, or it's being touted as such. What are the things you're seeing? What are the AI innovations or the things that are changing or transforming or just making more efficient work for your clients or for your own sort of agency operations? What are the things that are really kind of like have moved the needle for you?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier actually, and I think this conversation has cropped up a lot of times with some larger clients. In that, maybe there's a team of a few hundred people implementing email as a channel. Let's just take email as an example. We don't need that anymore, and actually, machines and AI can save a hell of a lot of money, be quicker, and be just as effective. There's a lovely stat which I like to quote from a litmus report probably a few years ago now, which is I think I've probably tweaked it over the years, but I think it's 85% of CRM is done outside of a platform. And I think when you think about CRM as a discipline, a- actually, what do you want to employ? Do you want to employ a platform expert or do you want to employ a CRM expert? If AI and platforms are becoming increasingly automated, how do we gain an advantage over our competitors? Because it's leveling the playing field. And I think there are some smaller challenger brands that are seeing this as a real opportunity, and actually they should see it as an opportunity. You didn't mention agentic AI, and especially agentic search. I think that's a real opportunity for smaller brands. Machines cannot tell whether something's soft or hard. It can't tell you what how something feels, and actually, where there's a small product portfolio where you can start describing a hell of a lot more about what that product feels like, what it and how it physically sits in a room potentially. When you've got a small product catalog, that's a hell of a lot easier to do by hand or by a human. When you've got a big product catalog, that's really, really difficult. And I think we'll start seeing some smaller brands actually gaining an advantage over some of those larger brands with a massive product catalog who aren't able to have that depth of data, especially from an agentic search point of view. I welcome AI. I think it is a real opportunity for us. I also think it will change consumer behavior. And it's very easy for us to talk about what advantages that brings from a platform. But ultimately, the thing that makes CRM a success is the customer. And I often come back to that with every single client is what does the customer want? We only saw Google release an update or release news the other day that Gemini is changing the way that we'll see email within Gmail, and that will change it will change customer behavior. It will change the way that people interact with email. I think we have between 8 and 10 seconds at the moment to grab someone's attention with an email. That's probably quite a lot in reality, but that's going to change, and we'll see. People don't go and fetch email anymore. They're not as task orientated. You'll get a prompt or you just quickly scroll through, and now you'll get an AI summary. So it's not going to happen in every single email client, and the discipline of doing email well or doing SMS well, or whatever channel you're choosing still needs to be there. But I think doing the basics well, segmenting data properly, um, that batch and blast there's no room for it now. There's definitely no room for it in the future. And personalization is that term that we always band around as people who work in CRM. But it becomes more and more important that messaging is not personalized, not hi Ian, but the whole message is tailored towards need.
I wrote an article recently about personalization is optional, relevance is mandatory, was the title of the article, because I think you can be relevant without being personalized. You know, you said you could, hey, hi, and then the product bears no relation, or it's at the wrong time, or whatever, the wrong context, or all those kind of things. And I think AI is going to force people to up their games, especially from an email perspective. And I also think it will. I think it will push people to channels outside of the email potentially a little bit more as well. Human beings, to a degree, are lazy. So I think if I can get the same thing from SMS or WhatsApp, whatever it is, and I'm not going to get the interference of, hey, maybe I'll go there. And I think that's going to be interesting to see how those other channels go. You talk about AI and all that kind of stuff, from an ethical or practical perspective, but certainly within your own work, how do you set those creatively? Like in terms of like where does the ethical element of AI sit with you as an agency?
It depends on the client, I think, is part of the answer to that. It sounds like a bit of a get out. I think what we see from an AI point of view is that legal teams within clients are still unsure. and that means for a lot of clients we're not able to use AI. From an idea generation point of view, from a copywriting point of view, we can use it to a certain point, but humans are still really, really important in that process. And I think it'll be a long time before we're completely replaced. So
Fingers crossed.
yeah, a lot of the time it is down to the clients. Where we are seeing real success, however, it is using AI to check effectively what we're doing. We train AI on an individual client, so we know that if their feedback contradicts something they've said before, we can question it. What we're no longer relying on is a human to remember that, and what that allows us to do is to that QA process, but also the briefing process. It just makes it a hell of a lot quicker, and it means that we can focus on the things that really matter rather than just going through and double checking absolutely everything. We're not completely reliant on it, but it definitely speeds up that process. So I think for us, it's still it's a tool that we use a lot, but we can't do everything because the legality issues that still exist around AI for some clients.
I think the point you talk about is a tool. It's a tool, not a crutch. Is where because I was reading some research the other day about how it was in academia and students at university, overuse of AI can lead to kind of cognitive decline. Essentially, you don't think as well as you used to. I think it's I think that's I can kind of sometimes feel that sometimes. It's like, "Oh, just check I am." Like, "No, come on, you know this. Why are you doing that for?" But I think as a research tool and as a research assistant, almost like treating it as like a junior research assistant, say, go away and find out this. Like, invaluable. Like, absolutely invaluable. And then as long as you make sure you're checking the links and and not taking what it turns out at face value, I think it can be hugely valuable for that kind of research activity.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I still think there's a hell of a lot of bias there, though, and I think actually prompt engineering is becoming just as important as understanding what comes out. I wouldn't take anything on face value. I still think there's a hell of a lot of research that needs to be done. So where I'm saying for some things that we're using it for, it's time saving. Actually, the kind of depth of research is really good, but we're still taking just as much time because we're having to fact check. We're having to go through each thing and make sure there is no bias there.
Well, that link 2010 and it's 2026. See that sort of stuff all the time. Yeah.
But things are changing all the time, and things are moving so quickly that maybe that will change in a few years' time, or maybe a few weeks' time.
And that leads on to my sort of, I guess, last question, I guess, on AI, which is, again, there was a great report and it talked about the idea that AI capability is improving at an exponential rate, but companies kind of grow at a logarithmic rate. So there's this gap that's growing between what AI can do and what companies are able to do with it, in a sense, because of their own limitations and their own data and capabilities and whatnot. So we're in this kind of weird liminal space between, oh my God, this amazing thing, and yeah, but our data still exists on some IBM mainframe from the 1970s or something. So I'm trying to understand how you navigate and how your clients are navigating that liminal space of like this promise, but the reality and where that sits and how you manage that situation.
That is a tough question. I don't think there's an easy answer to that, and I think the answer will change depending on every single client and every single individual scenario. I think what we have to go back to ultimately is what's the use case, and it's a very typical agency answer to go. Ultimately, what are we trying to achieve here? AI is the answer, not all of the time. AI is an enabler. And if ultimately that helps us to be more accurate, to have better results, to shortcut something, to get somewhere quicker, cheaper, then it's great. But it is not the only solution. So for us, it is really important to go back to what ultimately are we trying to achieve, and is AI part of that solution? Is technology part of the solution? Is a human part of the solution? But really importantly, what do we need to learn along the way, and how do we fail quickly, or how do we learn and then grow? You mentioned something earlier, which I was going to mention another point, but I think it's kind of relevant here, is that we are big advocates of including things in CRM campaigns that people don't click on. and and that's where success factors sometimes for us, it's we need to know what people aren't interested in as well as what people are interested in. And that means that we can tailor and be more personalized and be more relevant. Actually, that's where that use case comes in. What are we ultimately trying to achieve? If we're using AI to generate something, maybe that human element of what's the opposite to that? What can we put here to learn about? How does that data journey work? So all of that's important. The short answer to your question is let's go back to the use case. What are we trying to achieve, and what's the best way to do that? It might not be AI.
I think that's a great, so from your perspective as a specialist and expertise, that way of helping your clients navigate that, I think is really important. I think what I'm super interested in, especially in bigger companies, is where the C-suite expectations are versus the people who actually, forgive me, do the work. What the reality is and how those two things mesh. I think that's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years. Is that we want this, yeah, but we can't, and how that's going to work. I mean, it's really interesting. All right, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to skip on to one question that I think there's a part of me, the nostalgia part of me, that kind of goes, I'm glad I grew up as a CRM practitioner in the world of direct mail, because the fundamental cost of direct mail means that your targeting has to be right. Everything has to be right, because you're spending, back in the day it was a lot less, but you're spending a bunch of money on production, the whole 9 yards. So you can't just blatch and blast. It's got to be, and I think part of me is the grumpy old man who yells at clouds is kind of like, I wish people today had come up in that content. I wish the email cost like 50p a pop, because then the world would be a little bit different. Are there things that you wish you could turn the clock back on 10, 15, 20 years? Are there some things you think we've maybe lost in this race for progress?
It's a really good question. I do. I just pick up your point on DM for a second. I love a bit of DM, but I think it's a risk these days. I think it is seen as a risk because that cost is high, and I actually think that email has become easy. But have we got stuck in a rut? Have we got ourselves in a hole? And actually trying new channels, has that become too restrictive because we've let that happen? Are CRM managers too scared now to go, I tell you what, let's use Viber because this massive APAC audience, let's use Viber, let's use WeChat. That's going to be alien to a lot of boards, and that's hard. So the thing that I think I'd roll back the clock on, and I've made mistakes over the years, as I'm sure we all have, and they've changed me, probably for the better. But I think we've lost the culture of curiosity, and it's something we try to encourage massively at Flourish. I think my younger self, I asked more questions. I was more inquisitive. I read more books. And I think if I could roll back the clock and look at all of the things that we're talking about, where it's a hell of a lot easier to access things now, has probably made us slightly lazy. So for me it's that thirst for knowledge, that let's read more books, let's let's take notes, let's scribble in the margins, let's ultimately ask more questions. And I think if we did that now, we'd probably act sooner. We probably wouldn't wait to make decisions. And I think that would make life slightly different. I think that of BBC News. I get BBC News prompts, and it's very selected news. It's news I don't really want to hear. It's most often bad news, and that affects me. It affects me mentally, and I'm sure it does. I'm sure it affects the state of the nation. So roll back the clock a little bit. Let's pick up a newspaper.
100%. Well, look, thank you very much. We have one question I ask of all my guests, and it's always fun. We have the Everybody Hates Your Brand Room 101. Everyone knows the concept from the book 1984. This one's a slightly more related to the BBC TV show of the sort of 90s and 2000s, where celebrities will come on and they would suggest something that they annoyed them and repeat their case for the host, which was usually Paul Merton, to put it into room 101 for purgatory forever. And I've been running this for a long time, and I've had some great answers some tiny, small little things, some huge philosophical things. So I am presenting you with this opportunity now, Ian, to tell me what would be the thing that you would like to do with sort of marketing or business that you would like locked away for eternity in room 101.
I'm going to go for one of the small things. I'm going to join that crew.
Good. I
It's
like petty. Let's do petty.
it is petty. It's something that is petty, but I'm very passionate about, and I'd like to set everyone a challenge for this as well. But the thing that bothers me the most, the thing that I'd like to lock away, is social media icons at the bottom of emails. They are completely pointless. We stick them there because we think it's best practice, but I challenge everybody to go and see how much they clicked on. We've done this across 6 months with some massive clients. They had a 0.01% click rate. We spend so much time looking at whether we should have round corners, square edges, whether the contrast is right, but yet we ignore those social media icons that don't get clicked on. It is sent for a different reason. We're sending emails for a specific reason. Social media icons do not belong in a footer. Put a different ETA in that footer. Your email will be more successful. Lock it away.
I love that. That can go in 100% because I like a petty, not petty is on word, but I like a small specific thing. That's a good one. Great. And the other thing is it builds off what CRM is all about, which is what's working and what's not working. And we can actually see that and do something about it. So I think that's fantastic. Well, look, Ian, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Some fascinating points and an optimistic but pragmatic view of the world for sure. Please remember to subscribe on your platform of choice and maybe give a positive review of this podcast if you found it useful and have the time. And until next time, as my mum always says, take great care and be vigilant out there.